I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on Earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
In light of the recent dark money-funded, manufactured protests we've seen pop up around the country, poorly attended and proffered as they were, a repugnant trend has metastasized within swaths of the American public, and the neo-Marxist far-left stands exposed as the venomous architects behind it. The calculated normalization and perverse glorification of political violence, with Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and others as their prime targets. The attempted assassination of President Trump on July 13, 2024 wasn't an anomaly. It was the opening salvo in what's morphed into a meticulously engineered assassination culture, a term that barely scratches the surface of this ideological rot. This isn't a spontaneous eruption of discontent. It's a structured, ideologically fueled offensive, orchestrated by the neo-Marxian American Fifth Column, with a precision that demands both fury and dissection. It's infiltrating digital networks and physical spaces, eroding political stability and public safety with a virulence that's impossible to ignore. We're not just witnessing chaos. We're facing a deliberate assault that requires unrelenting scrutiny and a refusal to let these murder-advocating radicals slink away unchallenged. The National Contagion Research Institute delivered a scathing indictment in a December 2024 report wielding hard data to unmask the neo-Marxist far-left's role. Drawing from a survey of 1,264 U.S. residents, calibrated to census demographics, and bolstered by open-source intelligence, the NCRI demonstrated how these neo-Jacobin ideologues are weaponizing social media narratives to sanctify murder. The numbers aren't just alarming, they're a call to arms against this insidious trend. The assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was the neo-Marxist far-left's grotesque catalyst, laying bare their chilling tolerance for violence among their young, hyper-online acolytes. But their ambitions didn't stop there. Their sights have expanded to encompass political giants like Trump and Musk, revealing a broader, more sinister agenda. The data cuts like a blade. 38% of respondents deemed Trump's murder at least somewhat justified. 31% extend that to Musk. Among the self-congratulatory left-of-center cohort, where Marxist sympathies fester, these figures surge to 55% and 48% respectively. Nearly 40% even backed torching a Tesla dealership. These aren't statistical blips. They're evidence of a societal fracture engineered by the American Fifth Column's relentless radicalism. What fuels the rage here is the cold, systematic nature of this ideology. This isn't a loose collection of unhinged outbursts. It's a framework based in Marxist conquest, rigorously constructed to legitimize violence as a political instrument. The NCRI's correlation analysis dismantles any pretense of spontaneity. Support for murdering Trump, Musk, or Thompson clusters tightly with the ideological and psychological markers, pointing to a coherent belief system rather than random malice. At the core sits left-wing authoritarianism, a neo-Marxist hallmark defined by moral absolutism, a vicious punitive streak against dissenters, and a readiness to impose their warped vision through force. The NCRI's regression models show respondents with high LWA scores as disproportionately likely to endorse assassination and property destruction. Statistical proof that this assassination culture is a deliberate neo-Marxist construct, not some organic uprising. These aren't outliers. They're the vanguard of a movement that cloaks its bloodlust in pseudo-revolutionary rhetoric. Survey respondents who justify Trump's killing also tend to greenlight Musk's murder and venerate Luigi Mangione, Thompson's assassin, as a folk hero. Mangione's name now adorns a perverse California ballot measure, the Luigi Mangione Access to Health Care Act, a grotesque monument to the murderous far left's ability to spin a killer into a symbol. His deny, defend, depose mantra, etched on a shell casing, isn't just a slogan. It's a statistical predictor of violent intent among those who see bloodshed as their righteous cudgel against perceived systemic evils. This isn't fringe. It's the American fifth column clawing into the mainstream, with platforms like Blue Sky as their accelerant. The NCRI's multivariant regressions, controlling for age, gender, race, education, and party affiliation, pinpoint far-left identity, LWA, and Blue Sky usage as the strongest drivers of support for assassinating Trump or Musk. Blue Sky's ecosystem, where Mangione's image is gamified and violent calls are veiled in irony, isn't just permissive. It's a radicalization engine. X amplifies this further, with viral threads racking up tens of millions of views, serving as both a gauge and a multiplier of the far left's toxic influence on public attitudes towards Trump, Musk, and Tesla. Reddit offers a parallel lens. Subreddits like Free Luigi, which has 37,000 members, and Luigi Mangione Justice, which has 14,000 members, evade moderation to function as a neo-Marxian incubator where coded glorification of violence escalates into explicit threats against Trump, Musk, and government targets, often parroting Mangione's rallying cry. These aren't isolated echo chambers. They're data-driven breeding grounds for real-world escalation, as the California ballot measure starkly illustrates. Psychologically, the neo-Marxist far left exploits a potent variable, external locus of control, the belief that life's outcomes hinge on outside forces. The NCRI's analysis ties this to support for violence, with coefficients showing a clear link. When paired with economic volatility and institutional distrust, it's a combustible mix. These individuals, primed by neo-Jacobin narratives to see themselves as victims, view assassination and destruction as agency reclaimed, a hypothesis born out of the disproportionate LWA scores. Platforms amplify this grievance, ideology rationalizes it, and psychological fragility weaponizes it. The raw figures are a gut punch. 55.2% of left-leaning respondents, where neo-Marxist influence runs deep, see Trump's murder as at least somewhat justified, with 13% fully endorsing it. For Musk, 48% agree, and 9% unequivocally so. The July 2024 attempt on Trump's life wasn't a one-off. It was a data point in a trend line. The American fifth column's growing comfort with targeting figures like Trump and Musk, embodiments of power and resistance, signals a deliberate unraveling of civic norms. This assassination culture, birthed by the neo-Marxist far left, and fueled by rhetoric spewed forth by the likes of Jasmine Crockett, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rachel Maddow, and the Gorgons of The View, is a statistical and existential threat to American democracy and a direct threat to the well-being of our republic. They're taking political violence, once a universal taboo, and recasting it as a legitimate tactic, with data showing a clear ideological footprint. Their tolerance, hell, their advocacy for bloodshed undermines the bedrock principle that disputes are settled through discourse, not death, through conversations, not violence. Trump and Musk aren't random targets. They're lightning rods for neo-Marxian manufactured resentment, symbols of wealth, influence, and defiance. The California ballot measure is a quantifiable spillover, and with 40% shrugging at Tesla dealership arson, the gap between intent and action is shrinking fast. The NCRI's predictive models warn that without a forceful counter, this Marxism-driven trend will escalate. Probability estimates rise with each unchecked data point. In an era of economic instability and eroding trust, the conditions are primed for their digital radicalism to ignite physical chaos and death. This demands more than outrage. It demands analysis and definitive action. The American Fifth Column's assassination culture, with Trump and Musk as its focal points, is a structured, data-backed menace fueled by ideology, amplified by far-left social media platforms, and rooted in psychological vulnerabilities. It's not a fleeting anomaly. It's a growing threat that could fracture our republic if we don't dismantle it now. So the time to confront this is now, before the rhetoric of justification becomes the reality of bloodshed. The numbers don't lie, and neither should our resolve. We should crush this evil before it's too late. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is nothing but a repackaging of cultural Marxism, aiming to dismantle American values and the very fabric of our society. It's a dangerous ideology that seeks to divide us, pitting groups against each other in the name of pseudo-equality. We must stand firm against this threat, protect our heritage, and preserve the principles that made America great. We at Underground USA urge you to educate yourselves by taking the free courses at Hillsdale College to understand the depth of this issue. America's future depends on our vigilance and commitment to truth. That future begins with you.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
Well, Frank, you got a lot of people out there. Some are saying the tariffs are the greatest thing in the world. Some are saying this is destroying everything. Where do you think we are in all this?
It's somewhere in the middle, but leaning more towards the good thing. When this is a corrective measure, it's a corrective measure that's resulted from decades of our government not taking an interest in what's good for our country. This idea that we have this incredible imbalance with China and we were supposed to be okay with it while they're expanding their influence using slave labor around the world. We didn't talk about it because it's an ugly fact, but the cheap stuff that we can buy over here that was made in China, chances are it was made at some point touched hands of slave laborers over there. So why are we being morally hypocritical here? We say land of the free, home of the brave, and freedom should reign around the world, except for when we want cheap stuff. Then it's okay to have this incredible imbalance between us and China, and it only empowered China. This is the point that I don't get. It only empowered them to be able to expand on the backs of those people and on the backs of a false economy that they created that we just accepted as equal. Letting them into the World Trade Organization was the stupidest thing that the world has ever done. It is a commu-capitalist type of economy. It's not free trade. It's not fair trade. But the world needs what? Cheap stuff that falls apart in a year so badly that we just overlook that and realize that we're enriching people who want to control the world and oppress their people.
Right. Well, no, you're exactly right. And one of the things too, Frank, is this idea that, well, but we just don't want to pay more money for a shoe or for something like that. It is really getting exposed now. And that's why I kind of led with this at the opening of more and more people need to be talking about what the Chinese government is really up to. Because if it's just looked at like you're talking about in some superficial way, then it seems like, well, Trump is crazy because he's singling out China in this way. But there's something more going on here.
Yeah, it's a realignment from a totalitarian expansion globally to the idea that maybe nations should be sovereign. And who isn't second guessing what's going on with the economy reformation here? People in Australia, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, because China's in their backyard, and China doesn't think twice about saying, well, let's build up our military and have exercises in the South China Sea. Let's rattle a saber against Taiwan. Let's rattle a saber against Australia. One of our closest allies in that region. They understand what the threat is. And when you look at the expansion through the initiatives that they've had in giving inflated money, the currency manipulation that China has undertaken against every currency in the world, but especially the U.S. dollar, which is the world's reserve currency still, is criminal in nature. It makes the inflation of the markets that we had in 2008 and 1987 look like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're giving this quote unquote free money to third world countries to invest in their infrastructure and then bringing their people over to build these things. Oh, and a military base.
Yeah. That's the Belt and Road Initiative. And then they know they can never pay it back. And now they've got total control.
Yeah.
It's all by design.
Or they have significant control. So that's the bigger picture here that we have to look at. The smaller picture here is the lesson that we should have learned from COVID. If we can't make things in the United States to be self-sufficient, then shame on us. We couldn't even get disposable masks, even though it was stupid to be wearing them, because now every study in the world says they did nothing. And by the way, if you're still wearing one, you're an idiot.
I see people wearing them. I do.
It's just a marker that says, you know what, don't park too close to that car because you'll get keyed. That's what that is. But we need to be self-sufficient here in the United States. When we are strong, when a country is strong economically and can stand on its own 2 feet and not depend on another country for anything, whether it's pharmaceuticals or anything, then we can trade with other countries because we look at their products and we want to trade with them, not because we have to.
There is a lot of volatility that is happening. And as we kind of started out this morning, you were saying it's kind of somewhere in the middle in terms of, is it the greatest thing or is it destroying everything? But it is interesting that the focus is somehow on Trump and that he has no idea what he's doing. But Frank, I don't think he woke up and said, let's just do a bunch of tariffs. I think it was a means to an end to really realign the global trading structure. I think he's been waiting to do something like this. But a lot of people are thinking now that, well, this is just causing too much trouble. Is the trouble worth it? Or should it just go back to normal, quote unquote?
Well, anybody who's thinking that way is intellectually challenged, because the Black Monday that was supposed to happen didn't. Instead, 70 countries from around the world reached out and said, we got your point. Let's sit down and talk about making trade a little bit more fairer, between the two nations, and then let's all continue to trade and make each other's economies happy. And Trump said, sounds good to me. Let's suspend this for 90 days, except for China, because you people are indignant. and you've got this communist conquest mentality, and you've been shopping it as friendliness and cooperativeness around the world for far too long when it's disingenuous. So what happened? The stock market yesterday at the close is at 39. We were at 40 for a high when everybody was pig happy, and we're at 39. The sky did not fall. The world did not end. It just didn't. And China's currency took a huge hit, which means that their inflated value that they have been disingenuously elevating throughout the recent history against the dollar and every other currency is having that great reset, to borrow a phrase from Klaus Schwab, back to a level where it's actually a little bit more accurate. So the people who are screaming about the stock market because it's down 1,000 points from its high, I'm sorry. I can't take you seriously. You're obviously a Trump contrarian, and that makes you useless in any argument, because that's all you've got. You're either a Trump hater or you're a far leftist, and to return to what you would like means returning to like midterm at Joe Biden. No, thank you.
It is really palpable, as you said. I like the way you said it, the Trump contrarian, because Trump has either suggested it, implemented it in this case, and has, backed off with these different countries, as you said, save for China. Everything is just clouded by the TDS. I mean, this is a real problem. It's almost as if in this country we can't even have a legitimate discussion about anything, because if it involves Trump and you're against Trump, Trump could, tomorrow solve all the economic problems, and the stock market could be at 1 million, and they'd still say, but he did it the wrong way, or they'd have some other kind of criticism for that.
We'll take a look at Adam Schiff and the other idiots on the left. Blumenthal is another one who comes out with no evidence whatsoever and says, well, the stock market went down and then it went up. There must be insider trading. They did this on purpose to make themselves rich. Do you have any proof, sir? No, I don't, but all the indicators are there. All the indicators are there. What kind of stupidity is that? The indicators are there. The indicators are there that it might be night coming up. The indicators are there. So does that mean when the stock market went down under Joe Biden, he was insider trading? No, it meant the stock market went down.
Right.
The insanity of this, everything has to have this nefarious motive with Donald Trump. And again, if you go back into the archives and look at when Donald Trump first ran for president, I had issues with him too. They weren't to the level of where I wasn't going to vote for the guy, but I preferred someone else. But over the years, I was intelligent enough to be able to say, you know what? His stuff is working. His policies are working. The economy is better. We're stronger militarily. We have better relations around the world. Peace is breaking out in the Middle East. No new military battles have been started. New home construction is up. New business ventures are starting. Salaries are up. Taxes are down. If you attach those things to any other name, people would be saying, we've got to vote for that guy. Mm-hmm. But because the media and the Democrat Party and the American Fifth Column, the neo-Marxist Jacobins of the American Fifth Column, because they hate this outsider who's trying to destroy their gravy train of the deep state, anything that he touches must die. And it's exactly. and the American people are waking up to this. That's why his approval ratings are still huge. And the Democrat Party's recognition it's so toxic. I think they're at 21% now in some polls. Mm-hmm. And they're saying that the leaders of their party, not even Barack Obama, He only got 4% when the Democrats were polled. I don't put a lot of trust in polls, but sometimes the truth is so amusing you just have to highlight it. Barack Obama's done the 4%. It's AOC and Bernie Sanders. That's their saving grace? Two socialists?
That's right. Yeah.
Two socialist quasi-communists, I guess. So that's it. They're just doubling down on the stupid. But yeah, we making the American economy not dependent on a communist country like China, that's a bad thing for some people. I don't get that.
Well, it's this term, the interdependence, it's been bandied about for a very, very long time, but we've gotten to the point where, as you talked about, even with COVID, but even in time of war, or if there is a movement against Taiwan, I mean, China can turn off pharmaceuticals to us like a light switch. That seems to be the worst possible, position for us to be in, because we're not in a position right now to tool up and make medicine.
Interdependence is the verbiage of the globalist elite. It came, that whole move to become interdependent came out of World War I and Woodrow Wilson, going into Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And what happened at Pearl Harbor? We had to figure out how to retool in this country on the fly to be able to make ships and tanks, because we weren't paying attention. We were too interested in being liked around the world, and we were not self-sufficient. And we're in that same boat right now. We need to be self-sufficient so we can build ships, so that we can have pharmaceuticals if the world decides to shut down again because some third world moron over at the World Health Organization says, pandemic!
Right.
We can't be put in that position again where we have to take a knee and the Chinese can go, oh, yeah, that's right. You've got contracts for these things that we're supposed to get you. We'll get right on that. No, we need to be self-sufficient so that we are strong. When we are strong, freedom for everyone is better off. When we're weak, we have to deal with the communist Chinese, Vladimir Putin, Maduro down in Venezuela for oil. I don't want to go back to those days. Those were days under Joe Biden, and those were some of the worst times, even more so than during the Carter years, which half the voters can't remember.
Well, Frank, we can shift gears here a little bit, because another huge problem that the American administration, the Trump administration, has to deal with is Iran. I mean, on top of everything else in the entire world, Iran's still trying to get its ability to have a nuclear weapon, to be able to deliver it. But Iran now is saying it's actually proposing some kind of interim deal as a means, I guess, to buy more time before the deadline by President Trump set up, which happens in about 2 months, comes to pass.
And that's been their modus operandi going all the way back to before 2000 in their pursuit of a nuclear weapon. It's stall, then say no, then say maybe, then say I won't talk to you directly, then say I'll talk to somebody else. Then we'll say, okay, well, let's come to an agreement. And how about the UN comes in and makes sure that you're not doing this? And they go, no, inspectors can't come in. Then it's, well, we'll think about, let's have negotiations on whether they can come in. Let's see. Then we'll talk about what they can look at. Now we'll say no again. And it's all about buying time. And at some point, that clock is going to hit midnight and it's going to be moot. They will have it. So the idea that they get to keep playing this game and the world just goes, oh, they want to come to the negotiating table. We can't do that anymore. They've proven beyond a shadow of the doubt that they don't value human life. They just don't. Hezbollah is an arm of their Iranian Revolutionary Guard. That's a terror group, one of the biggest ones in the world. They fund it. They use it as a proxy army. They fund Hamas. That's a terror group. They fund the Houthi. That's a terror group. So why should we take them at their word? Let's take a look at what this country does. What, besides oil, what do they export? Terrorism.
Well, exactly. Terrorism. That's their one big thing.
The people in their country who are not the mullahs are Islamic. The people of Iran are Persian. The mullahs are not indigenous to Iran. That's what that whole revolution in 1979 was. It was a hostile takeover of a country by an Islamo-fascist political system. If women show their hair on the street, they can not only be arrested and fined, but they can be beaten and imprisoned because it's improper for a woman to show any skin or hair. They have these morality police that walk around just looking for women who are just trying to dress the way they did before 1979.
Mm-hmm.
If you happen to be gay over there, don't let anybody know, because if they find out, you get detained and it's a death sentence.
Yeah, you get thrown off a roof.
Yeah. So where is the LGBTQ plus community saying anything about that? That's another fraud. This whole movement about we have to take to the streets because Trump is oppressing the LGBTQ plus community. No, we're not. We're just tired of hearing about it 24/7, 365. And keep your drag queen shows away from our kids in school. That's just stupid.
It is interesting, Frank. I'm so glad that you bring this up, because it's never directed at these horrible regimes or at the Taliban. Talk about treatment of women and the oppression of women. What you're describing in these different places is off the charts, but it always seems to be directed inward to the United States as a destabilizing mechanism, I think, to a great degree.
One of the first books I wrote was Women in Fundamentalist Islam. And it was the most heart-wrenching thing to ever have to put pen to paper about. The things that women go through in the Islamic culture, the world should be ashamed of itself that we haven't extinguished this garbage before now. We're not even really addressing it now, but people have been screaming from the rooftops about it. You want to talk, the Biden administration had a wonderful foreign policy. Afghanistan, the Taliban. We promise women will have rights over here. Don't worry. Just leave all your weapons and leave, ugly American dog. And what do? Women can't go to school anymore over there. If they're not wearing the full burqa, they get executed. They hold no positions of authority after all the promises that everything was going to remain the same. Just a bunch of bull. So this idea that they want to take to the streets over here to protest oppression, paper tiger garbage. If you're really serious about alleviating oppression in the world, stop looking inside the United States. We're the freest country on the face of the planet. You want to put your money where your mouth is? Cowards, one and all? Go over to Afghanistan and do that. Go over to Iran and do that. Go over to Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to be friendly to the United States, and do that. Go anywhere on the African continent and do that. You're not coming back if you do.
Well, but people in this country, too, have sort of been through, either the education system or the media or all these different signals that are sent to them that you are oppressed, that, you can't express yourself, et cetera, and that the United States is probably one of the worst countries in the world, and it needs to be completely fundamentally redesigned. That I think is very scary indeed.
Well, and this is where, and we've been saying it in one form or another for as long as we've been talking, Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been saying it for at least 30 years. You've got to stop listening to the media and saying, well, they said it, it must be true. Or if a politician comes out and says, well, this is what the reality is, why aren't you questioning it? At some point, it can't be the fault of the media or the politician anymore. It has to be the fault of the person consuming the information who has no will to actually figure out whether it's true or not. And social media has exploded that problem. People, oh wow, I like the way that sounds. I'll like that and forward it. Did you check out to see if it was true or not yet? In the day of the internet, if you're too lazy, and that's the only word that can be used for it, too lazy to go, okay, I want to throw that into an AI search engine real quick and see what that says and what links it brings up to back up what it's saying. Because every AI search engine now has links from where they got the information from.
Mm-hmm.
Make up your own mind. Cheryl Atkinson says it best at the end of every one of her podcasts. Do your own research. Make up your own mind. If you're just listening to the news, whether it's Fox, MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times, I don't care where it is. If all you're doing is listening and saying, I'm taking that as the truth without questioning it, you are the problem.
Exactly. Well, that's, again, doing your own research, figuring it out, and being able to buttress your own arguments. See, yeah, that's exactly right, Frank. It becomes my team versus their team, and our team says this and so forth. But real independent thought takes some actual work on your part.
When we don't question what we hear, when something rings a bell in our head that says, "Really?" that facilitates the machines that actually bring despotism to power. What did we hear in 1939 in Germany? Jews are bad. Jews must be exterminated. We have to get rid of the Jews. And they kept thumping it and thumping it and thumping it and thumping it until American forces went in at the end of the war and found concentration camps and graves aplenty. 6 million of them, as a matter of fact. Now, the media and our educational institutions are allowing that same kind of propaganda to be foisted on university campuses. And you get on social media, and there are some places on social media where that kind of hatred is alive and well.
Yeah.
We just had a study come out that about it's okay. 55% of left-leaning Democrats believe that it's okay if Trump gets murdered.
Yes, scary stuff.
Unbelievable.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
In a ruling that can only be described as a grotesque example of judicial overreach marinated in constitutional illiteracy, a federal court has decided that the White House must grant the Associated Press perpetual access to its press briefings, citing the First Amendment's hallowed freedom of the press provision. But this decision, indicative of today's climate of entitlement masquerading as rights, twists the Founding Fathers' words into a pretzel of modern progressive dogma. The First Amendment guarantees freedom, not favoritism. It protects the press from government censorship, not from the government's discretion to choose its interlocutors. To argue otherwise, as this court apparently has, is to invent an obligation when none exists, and we must dissect this travesty with the scalpel of reason. Let's start with the text itself, because apparently the court couldn't be bothered to read it with any precision. The First Amendment states,
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
That's it. No footnotes, no hidden clauses, no secret handshake promising every outlet a front row seat at the White House podium. Freedom of the press means the government cannot silence journalists, jail them for their words, or shutter their printing presses. Historical abuses the founders knew well from British tyranny. It does not mean the government must fling open its doors, roll out a red carpet, and hand every self-proclaimed reporter a microphone and a chair. Yet here we are, with a court apparently convinced that freedom translates to mandatory inclusion, as if the Constitution were a participation trophy for the media class. The White House press pool has always been a curated affair, and for good reason. The executive branch, like any entity, gets to decide who it engages with directly. If the president wants to talk to Fox News one day and CNN the next, or, heaven forbid, snub the AP because it's been a thorn in his side, that's his prerogative. The press isn't entitled to equal airtime in the briefing room any more than I'm entitled to a private dinner with the president to air my grievances. Freedom of the press protects the AP's right to publish whatever it wants about the administration. Criticism, praise, or conspiracy theories aplenty. But it doesn't mandate that the White House play nice or play fair. The court's ruling, however, seems to conflate a constitutional shield with a battering ram, forcing the government to cater to the press's every whim. This isn't just a misreading. It's a deliberate distortion. The First Amendment's history screams restraint on government power, not expansion of media privilege. When the founders enshrined press freedom, they were thinking of pamphleteers like Thomas Paine, not sprawling corporate behemoths like the AP, demanding VIP access. If the AP wants to report on the White House, it's got the internet, public statements, leaks from disgruntled staffers, plenty of avenues that don't require a judicial edict shoving it into the briefing room. To claim exclusion violates the First Amendment is to pretend the amendment's purpose is to level the playing field, when it's really about keeping the government's hands off the field entirely. And let's talk precedent, because this ruling, if it stands, opens a Pandora's box of absurdity. If the AP gets a court-ordered seat, what's next? Does every outlet, from the New York Times to some guy with a blog and a webcam, get to sue for access? The White House briefing room isn't infinite. It's not a magical TARDIS that expands to accommodate every journalist with a byline. The administration has to draw lines somewhere, and courts have historically deferred to this discretion. Look at Sherrill versus Knight from 1978. A reporter denied a press pass didn't win a constitutional jackpot because the Secret Service had security concerns. The D.C. Circuit said the First Amendment doesn't guarantee unrestrained access. It requires only that denials not be arbitrary or viewpoint-based. If the White House has a rational basis, say the AP's track record of hostile coverage, it's within its rights to say, not today. But this court, in its infinite wisdom, seems to think freedom means everyone gets a turn, turning a constitutional principle into a kindergarten rule. The aggravated irony here is that the press itself should recoil at this decision. A free press thrives on independence, not a court-ordered handout. If the AP needs a judge to prop it up, what does that say about its clout or the public's trust in its reporting? The First Amendment isn't a crutch for media outlets too lazy or unpopular to fend for themselves. And what happens when the pendulum swings? Imagine a future administration using this precedent to force inclusion of fringe outlets, say a state-backed Pravda-like propaganda machine, under the same equal access logic. This court's ruling doesn't just overreach. It sets a trap for the very freedom it claims to protect. Critics might argue that excluding the AP stifles public discourse, that a major outlet's absence leaves us all in the dark. But thinking people know this is a nonsensical point. The AP isn't the sole arbiter of truth. It's one voice in a cacophony of media options. If the White House freezes it out, it can still investigate, publish, and scream from the rooftops, all rights the First Amendment fiercely guards. The public won't wither without the AP's briefing room soundbites. What's really at stake here is ego, not freedom of the press. The ego of a press corps that thinks it's owed a seat at the table rather than earning it through grit and ingenuity. In short, this court has butchered the First Amendment, turning a bulwark of liberty into a whining demand for equity of outcome. Freedom of the press is a right to speak, not a right to be heard by the government on your terms. The White House isn't a public utility obligated to serve every journalist equally. It's a branch of government with its own voice and choices. If the AP doesn't like being sidelined, it can do what the founders intended. Sharpen its quill, fire up its presses, and fight back the old-fashioned way. Anything less is a betrayal of the very freedom this ruling pretends to uphold.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Our constitutional republic is under siege by the neo-Jacobins of the radical left, pushing socialist agendas that erode our freedoms. Engaging with your elected officials isn't just a right, it's a duty. Your voice ensures they uphold the rights of the individual, protect the Constitution, and resist the left's overreach. Visit govtracks.us to contact your elected officials and stay informed on legislation. The midterms are coming. Together, we can safeguard liberty and make sure America stays on the right track.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It brings every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox. And do your part to safeguard the Republic. Talk politics, current events, and religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have these non-confrontational conversations about what's important to us, we realize we have more in common than in difference. And that starts to create e pluribus unum, out of many one. That's when we realize we're all Americans, and the dividers of the deep state are on the other side of the equation in preserving our republic as a representative government for all. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. My name is Frank Salvato.